Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Northern Shield because it leads into one question I had for you guys that's a little bit related. And this is kind of a general question, but I'll add some context. So, what do you guys think about getting tips, like getting mining stock tips? And you can answer this in a few different ways because it ranges from anything from like someone you know, and I'm guilty of this. I give tips all the time, like to various people. But like we give and receive tips privately, but you also could subscribe to a newsletter and get a tip that way, sometimes justified, sometimes not even justified. And then stuff gets thrown around all the time. I mean, CEO.ca is filled with tips. And so I'm just wondering how you guys feel about that. And you can answer it, from informed to uninformed and just kind of how you deal with that. And I've got some comments of my own.
You want to take a stab at that first, Fabi?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'm completely for it as long as the person knows that ultimately it's their responsibility, and I think they need to have a central thesis for investing, and that should sort of trump any tip. And so I love receiving tips, and I'm actually a subscriber to a very well-known guy in the industry, and regardless of who's giving me the tip, it will always come down to, okay, after doing all this research, and I'm very grateful for people who come to me and give me tips, especially if I know that they've had a lot of success, because at the end of the day, one person doing all of the research about every single company that there could possibly be in the resource sector is just too much stuff. Like, you're going to miss something, right? And chances are you're going to miss the stuff that's really going to go up 10 times. And so I really appreciate it when somebody comes to me and gives me a tip. But then I say, okay, what's this company doing? Does it fit my thesis? And my thesis is pretty simple. Is it cheap compared to what it should be worth right now? If it's cheap, then I take more interest, and then I might buy it, or I might wait for something else to happen so that it eventually does fit my investment thesis. But what I don't really like is people who just go blindly buy whatever ticker that they hear of without really having any sort of logical reason for the price of that stock going up, without looking at the chart. Has it gone up? What's the market cap? What are they doing? Who's buying and or selling that stock? And then after that, they blame the people who gave them the tip, or blame the newsletter writer, saying that they lost money. And not notice that, maybe it's good to buy up until a certain price because it's still a bargain, but after the stock runs, guess what? It doesn't matter. That stock is not the same buying opportunity as it was when it was, at 50 cents, at 30 cents, etc. And so I think that some retail participants of this industry could do with a little bit of just maturity. Just understand, at the end of the day, nobody's going to hold your hand and tell you which companies to buy and when to sell, more importantly. And so you have to think for yourself. You have to have some sort of filter. And once you've established that, then go and search for tips and hear people's tips and do your research. Because I think you can still make a lot of money. For example, I would never, just become the ultimate expert in West Africa. That's what Nick is for. And so when Nick says something, I listen. But as much as I love his picks, I'm going to go back and look at the price. And if it's not the price I want to pay for it, I'm not going to buy it, no matter how hot the stock is. So if you apply that, then I guess you can still make a lot of money, and then not have the burden of having to do all the research for every single area, every jurisdiction, every type of company. And I've benefited greatly from that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you should take tips wherever you come. Doesn't mean you have to actually go out and rush to buy the stock or anything like that. But my background, actually, just taking a step back here, is it just reminds me of my days when I was actively looking for rental properties and real estate. And It's you can't really put a price tag on making connections, and just lead generation is a very, very important skill to develop in real
Mm-hmm.
estate. And it basically means you go to these conferences, these meetup groups, and you just network your ass off, and you just try to make as many connections as you can, because you just never know who will become your next business partner, or who's going to tip you off to a good deal, or something like that. But the one thing with real estate that the approach I always took was, you're just naturally a cynic, because you go into anything with the assumption, there's nobody out there who's going to give me a free lunch or anything. Like you just go in with that mindset kind of as a defense mechanism. Like, you just kind of watching out for your downside risk, and it's basically assuming that nobody is out there to help you, even though that's that could be. I mean, there could be no truth to that at all. So. Even with real estate back then, I was going to all these meetups, and I would get tips. Like, I would be bombarded with tips and ideas, like, you should go to this market, you should go to that market, you should buy this property or that or something. So, if you apply it over to natural resource investing, it's kind of the same deal, where there's so many companies. As Fabi said, it's impossible to track the entire universe, and you should be just accepting of that up front, where it's basically you're just one person, you have limited bandwidth, so you kind of need all this feedback. But the important thing, I think, is you have to develop a filter, and that's easier said than done. It takes a lot of time and refinement, and I would even say a lot of failures. You have to speculate and put some capital at risk and actually lose it, because I think that will teach you the most important lessons, is when you actually put your own skin in the game at risk, and it just something fails. I mean, that's why it's a good idea when you speculate at first, is just don't put your whole life savings into something. Just put speculative play money, if you will, that you can afford to lose. But regardless, I mean, even if you lost $100 in a speculation, that burn is very real, and the lessons you learn will be ingrained for the future, which will benefit you greatly. So back to that point, so you refine this filter. For example, like now with the resource sector and mining, there's a bunch of people that are always feeding me hot tips, if you will. Like, I think this stock will run up because of this, XYZ or whatever. And I just build a database of all these different companies that I'm tracking, and I'm not really buying. But like, for the most part, like, I would agree. Like, with Fabi and Nick, I mean, just the mindset you take in is basically, you don't want to chase after hype and momentum when everything is positive and the stock is basically rising every day. With that said, though, you can make money off these hype plays, right? But the one thing I learned from somebody who was a lot more successful than me, and he was kind of like a mastermind, and how he was making money off these spec plays, and he's a natural kind of promoter kind of guy. So if you browse the forums enough, you'll kind of see him on there, and he has a way with words and to get a following and all that. But he is actually very shrewd in his strategy, where it's basically whatever play he hypes up, as soon as it runs, he always takes his initial capital, back. He takes his chips off the table, right? So that's something that I've learned. Like, if I'm going to do something like that, you always have to be cognizant of where the stock is, and if it's getting ahead of itself. And if it is, and you're making good money, like, you never let kind of the arrogance and the hubris and all that set in, where you think, the stock is going up because you're so smart. Like, if you just, take that out of the equation and just say, this stock is a good story, it's fundamentally sound, but it's getting ahead of itself, I should always protect my downside risk again. And that's, again, even when things are positive and momentum is in your favor, you play the role of the cynic again, where you're saying it's too good to be true, and you take that initial capital back out, and you basically mitigate risk that way. So with these tips kind of things, actually my favorite strategy is, again, not chasing momentum plays, but what I actually like is if somebody feeds me a tip on a really, really good story. And let's say in the past it was a $2 stock or something, and it was rising off of great drill results or something, and they made a discovery. But eventually over time, and I think this happens basically to, let's say, 99% of the companies that are listed, is they will lose the momentum, they will lose the hype, this whole life cycle of a mining company. And at some point, the industry will just basically toss it aside, because it's just not that exciting anymore. So I actually like to chase after those plays. For example, if a company was a $2 stock when they had no resource, and then they, delineated a 2 or 3 million ounce gold deposit, and now the stock is at like 40 cents or something. I actually like to chase those type of stories, and I appreciate the tips and the insights, from the people who, perhaps they got into the stock really early, and they have all this information that is useful. It's just the market kind of lost interest and moved on to something else. They chased the next flavor of the week or whatever. So I like to pile in on these stories. It's all speculation, but my guess is when sentiment returns back into in favor again, the sector is booming again, then these stocks do tend to get re-rated because they actually have legitimate discoveries, legitimate resources. So there's nothing wrong with the company. It's just not interesting right now, and it's kind of buying at a time when nobody cares. So that's kind of I guess you could say my preferred strategy of try to how I play the space. But I try to listen to everybody, whether it's somebody talking about the flavor of the week or something that was a hit like 2 or 3 or 5 years ago. Like I'll just take all that information, put it in a database, work it through the filter, and just go from there.
I feel like you both covered like what I originally was going to cover, like in your answers, but as you were talking, I actually thought a little deeper about how I feel about tips. I think this is really excellent newbies content because it's so you're going to be bombarded no matter what, and I love Jay's parallel to like lead generation and what you see in real estate. I mean, this happens in all industries, but on one end, what I see, and I think as a newbie, it's not. I mean, this is just it's going to happen. You'll probably get caught up in something like what you see from Future Money Trends, and I'm not bringing up to like get negative on that newsletter,
We
but
are
I
so
know,
gonna get sued.
This
I'm
one should
only
be fun.
joking. I'm only joking. Go ahead. Go
no, no,
ahead.
no. I just know for sure there are people out there that pretty much make their living just trying to be early on the Future Money's Trends pump. Like, and they're not even necessarily insiders. Like maybe they just know someone who's like in the company, and so they don't even care what the company is, and they're just trying to make money getting in before those emails come out, and they move up. And I'm not even saying there's something inherently wrong with that. But I know I would never have, consistent success that way. I mean, I see people, talking about it a little bit on CA, but to me, that's one extreme. And I have experimented with, trying to buy on like short-term tips, and it can come. It is important to try to size up who are you getting the tip from, like and like why are they? There's always an ulterior motive, but is it in some way aligned with what you're doing? How much does it run? All of that. I would say that for making short-term decisions, it's kind of a wash for me because I still like to experiment and buy something. Sometimes I'll do some quick research and I will impulsively, buy. Even to this day, I'll buy some shares because like, oh, this checks out. And then sometimes I'll regret it, and sometimes it will go up. It's like a little bit of randomness either way. But as Jay said, you're adding to like a database, and that part I love, and that you can whether you buy in the short term or not, you can always add something to the database. So the real value, and this is where I had to do some thinking while you guys were talking, I can't pretend to say that I come up, I'm like have these original picks, like somehow the pick, like I was the first person to ever discover this stock. It's like, no, there is no like godly like nonsense of like I had a vision or something. Somewhere along the line, I got exposed to it, and I think it's very interesting when I think deep down, a lot of my best picks were something where someone gave me some form of a tip, maybe 6 months or 12 months earlier, maybe even a couple years earlier, but it was in the back of my head somewhere, not even necessarily in some written database, but it's somewhere in my head, and I'm just thinking about a lot of the companies that I've had success with recently and that I've actually been buying in the last few months. I came across them a year or two ago, and I think that's and it was through some form of a tip, and I think that's an important kind of newbie's lesson to learn, and really my big money has come through, something more of that nature. And if I was going to add one thing, try to put yourself in the mindset, even though you might have gotten a tip a year or two ago, try to become the person that gives tips. Like that's what I try to do now. Like even if I don't pretend that I originally came up with the company idea. I mean, if I came up with it a year or two ago, but nobody's giving the tips now, like try to put yourself in that position because no one's talking about it. And I actually feel a lot more confident when I know, I'm not the first person to come up with the company, but I might be the first person this year to really discuss the company as a good buy. It's like it was something a few years ago, like Jay said, off some drill results, it went a lot higher. But like now, nobody cares about it. But you can be the tip giver. It doesn't mean you should go out and start telling everybody about it. But it's a very different mindset to be the one giving tips versus the receiving them. And I think you become very powerful in this industry if you start to take that mindset. So I loved your guys' answers, but that's just my little add-on to it.